We now move on to agenda item 13, which is the Community Resilience Strategy. That's on pages 151 to 173. I will be proposing this report. Do I have a seconder? I have a seconder, Councillor Perry. I'll just set out some opening remarks for this Community Resilience Strategy. First of all, can I personally thank the officers who worked closely with me to develop this plan, Jane Green and Christine Howard, who have worked with me since I took up the role of the Portfolio Holder for Community Resilience. This is a particularly important strategy document because it informs the portfolio that I took on in May. As we know, we are now in a position where we've come out of lockdown and are thinking about our post-COVID future as a town. And as a result of that, we have an obligation as an administration to set out the building blocks for how we build back better from a community perspective. And taking that into consideration, this strategy has a number of pillars. Those pillars, I think, are central to this strategy. There are 6 of them that highlight at a high level what this council will do in order to respond to the community challenges that we have built up over the coronavirus and want to move forward in a positive way. You'll see in the 6 pillars there, for example, the council's leadership role. We want to boost that going forward, and we've set out some strategic considerations to move that forward. Arts and culture, community engagement, safer communities, health inequalities. These are the building blocks of a strategic narrative that we want to communicate around increasing resilience, reducing inequality, and enhancing inclusion in this town. How are we going to go about doing that as a result of this high-end strategy? Well, there will be other tactical work that is informed in the back pages of this strategy. It will go out for a 6-week consultation, but I want to just end on a few other considerations. The key theme that flows throughout this strategy is, yes, addressing exclusion, but championing opportunity and prosperity in this town and strengthening community engagement. That is an area of focus that I will continue to champion. I think this strategy inevitably, as I say in my foreword, is the first step, but only by working with those community leaders. Some of those are carried with quotes throughout this strategy. Can we, with a renewed sense of purpose, deliver on some of the challenges that we have to build a stronger community post-COVID. I look forward now to questions from councillors. Do I see any questions? Councillor Edwards.
First of all, I just wanted to, I've got a number of questions, Councillor Charles, but I'd like to put that first of all in the context of sort of welcoming this report in the first instance. So I hope that my comments will be seen as constructive ones, because I think we all agree that we need to do it, moving on in this area. So my first question is around the data that we'll be using. Will we have some baseline data or statistics or whatever attached to these reports, and if so, what baseline data will we be using?
That's an important point, Councillor Edwards, and as I have said before, one of the key core central data sets that we're awaiting, and the 18-month period that we've gone through, it's particularly important that we receive these, is the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment that takes into consideration things like health inequalities. As I've said to you before, what is fundamental in my approach to the portfolio is an evidence-led approach. So the pillars that we've identified will need to be boosted by the data that we will in the future receive. We're still awaiting that data set. That will also inform the health and wellbeing strategy. At the moment we can only have a strategic positioning statement, but all of this will be informed by evidence so that we can carry forward those pillars. What I would say to you is I would take into consideration this document is a high-level strategic narrative which will be informed by detailed plans, some of which are indicated at the back pages of this. I know that we've gone through it with Jane. But my pledge is to use the evidence to inform our approach going forward, working with community leaders.
May carry on that. And so if I may carry on.
Of course, yeah.
So my next question, which you've already in a sense answered, is I would anticipate there will be some smart targets being attached to various processes. On page 159, there's a reference there to the fact that we have the lowest average employment income in England and Essex. We also know that we've got over 11,000 people on universal credit. We also know that there's marked economic disparity across the wards, various wards in the town, and that's been mapped on a number of occasions. So my question to you is, would you consider, as well as the pillars that you've got there, would you consider adding an economic inequality pillar? Because, you could either be termed in terms of economic inequality or financial sustainability as one of the pillars, so that we could really need to do a fair bit of work around that area.
Councillor, I think that is a fair challenge. But what I would say to you, because we've got this 6-week consultation, and we've already begun that consultation with you, and we will have what in effect will be a special COVID recovery group meeting that will go through this report in detail with members. But my commitment is to also work with community leaders to identify if the pillars that we have set out in this paper are where they need to be. I believe that they are. One of the key threads that runs throughout the strategy is extending opportunity and prosperity, because we recognise that there are areas in this town where we need to do more, and there is an absolute commitment from this administration to eradicate poverty wherever we see it. Only a few weeks ago did we hear the good news by Streets to Homes that no one was sleeping homeless, and that is a credit to our town and a charity that does fantastic work. And I recognise all those individuals who work for Streets to Homes, because it is a class act, frankly. But look, I hear you around your additional pillar, but I would urge you to contribute to the consultation, and I look forward to hearing other ideas. I will take an open mind for those types of suggestions that come in as a result of the consultation process in the next 6 weeks. But thank you for your suggestion.
I will be making further suggestions as we go through, so but come back. Page 165, it talks about the actively promoting the arts and cultural agenda. It also talks about, in particular, it talks about the town's public sculptures as standard bearers for promoting culture. Just a minor point really, but just to remind ourselves that most of those sculptures aren't in fact owned by the council, they're owned by the Harlow Arts Trust. And I think it would be useful at some point if we get the Harlow Arts Trust included as a partner in this document, as it works, because there doesn't appear to be a mention of them.
Shall I just answer that question? As it happens, Jane and I have met the Harlow Arts Trust and are looking to do a range of partnership working with them. One of the motivations you will see on page 165 is to reorientate the vision around arts and culture more generally in this 10-year vision statement, which I think is an exciting project, something that we've already discussed with the Harlow Arts Trust. But my commitment to you, Tony, they are an absolutely valuable stakeholder, and they will be involved in future discussions, and that is the commitment that I make to them.
Thank you. Moving on to page 167, where it picks up the question of community engagement. It talks about council being digital by default, which is not at the expense of those that cannot access services. So currently there's nothing in the report as to how they will achieve that in terms of those that don't access services in a default way. So there's, I think that needs strengthening.
And just to come in there, the rest of that paragraph is making sure all digital functions are accessible to people with all abilities is a fundamental commitment. Remember, Councillor Edwards, this is a top-end strategic document that states the direction of travel and will be informed by detailed action plans to endeavour to achieve the ambitions we set out. I'd also direct you to the equalities policy, whereby we said that this council's intent and as an administration is to factor in where we want to move and shift, transform services, that we do not forget all the groups that form part of this town, and we ensure accessibility is a fundamental thing that runs through all the policies and initiatives this administration carries forward.
I just reinforce that in the sense of, because there are a significant number of people in this town who do not have digital access, and I still think that needs to be strengthened. Simon is nodding in agreement.
And I would just reinforce with you that we make it explicitly clear in that paragraph that we will not, because the very definition of this strategy is promoting inclusion. And so I was very clear when we were drafting this in this paragraph that we made sure that there was parity between all abilities and ensuring that each community is able to access the council services on an equal footing. It's a fundamental principle spelled out in our equality policy as well.
Page 168, when we're talking about health inequalities, whilst I fully understand that in terms of this report it is very much looking forward, but I suppose just a word of caution really is that we're not out of this by any means yet, and there's no mention, we in the town have one of the lowest levels of COVID vaccination take-up when one looks in terms of across the county, in comparison to other areas across the county. So, and consistently, compared with the English national averages, we're between 3 and 4% on all of the scores below what's going on in terms of the English national average in terms of vaccination take-up. So, I would argue that we've still got, that there's possibly a need for something to go in there around the continuation of reinforcing the message with regard to vaccination and what other health messages come out.
Just on that point, Councillor Edwards, one of the fundamental drivers of this strategy is that we are not complacent about the existing challenges, but to move and pump primary efforts going forward in a post-COVID world, we address those health inequalities that are borne out by the data. And we don't have the most up-to-date data yet. I'm very keen and anxious, as all councils I'm sure are, to see that data so that it can inform our judgments on how we address health inequalities. Not to preempt it, but the health and wellbeing strategy positioning statement, it's a mouthful I know, will inform how we complement our colleagues in primary care are out there delivering day in and day out, and they face a whole range of pressures that, as a community leader, this council is conscious it needs to do as much as it can to support not just the GPs, but also not just our primary care partners, but also the acute care and what our fantastic colleagues in hospital are trying to achieve as well.
Moving on to page 169, when we start to talk about safe communities. Now it's interesting that again there are no baseline figures in there. What particularly concerns me is that we know that Harlow has the highest level in the county of domestic violence per head, and as Robert Halfon and others have said, it's horrific that rates of domestic violence are so high. So why is there no mention in there specifically of violence against women in this report?
There is, Councillor Edwards. We support safe partnerships, priority subgroups, of which one of them is addressing violence against women.
In which case I'd like to see that sort of reinforced, please, if I may. Finally, you spoke in terms of the consultation protocol, not quite finally, penultimately. You spoke in terms of the consultation process. You're anticipating a 6-week consultation process. Do we know when that's likely to be beginning?
Thanks, Councillor. We will endeavour to begin that consultation process as soon as we can. Subject to this report being agreed, we will set up the pathway and the timescales, but our commitment is a 6-week consultation process and communications will follow thereafter.
And given that, and now this is finally, given that this is the 5th draft, why were there not any discussions with the COVID recovery group prior to this paper being presented as cabinet? And given that we've only had one meeting of the COVID recovery group since the administration were elected.
This is an administration document because it dictates my portfolio, Councillor Edwards, as the Community Resilience Portfolio Holder. This is the principles that this administration will follow to address community need in a post-COVID world. It is up to this administration and this administration alone to set up the building blocks of this response as an administration, as the Council's leadership function, which is fundamental to seeing how we recover going forward. The social challenges that we face, we all are acutely aware of, but it is my responsibility, alongside my colleagues, to set out strategic intent. We have endeavoured to achieve that in this document. We're going forward in the COVID Recovery Group meeting, which will be a consultation process. You will have ample opportunity to have a far more detailed discussion that we have allotted for in this cabinet meeting, and I look forward to that.
If I may make a comment then, it would appear that there's been a...
Councillor Edwards, not all comments yet. You can, but questions, and then we'll get into comments.
No further question.
Any further questions from colleagues? I see no further questions. We'll move into comments. Councillor Saggers.
Having been a member of the local community through scouting, I welcome the document and its emphasis on the next generation coming through and how Council's commitment to obviously bringing people forward, obviously child obesity and things is something we're trying to combat and trying to get children away from the screens that they now adopt and the internet they use, out playing out into the fields, getting fresh air, because Harlow is a green town and we welcome being able to use that. Also, I welcome the fact that being biased, it did talk about Harlow Museum, which is obviously my board. It's a great place to be and great for people there. Lastly, it does talk about internet access for those. And being a key member champion, I'm also keen on the government's recommendation to try and get every household or every person to have access to the internet by 2030. And it does help that we have the Harlow Centre not too short away from here with NVIDIA committing quite rightly to a 5-year plan to really bring home digital in Harlow, the biggest data centre in the South East, so we don't bring jobs and revenue to the council there. So I look forward to it.
Thank you, Councillor Sackers. Comments? Councillor Perrin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I welcome this document. I think it's an extremely important document. And I'd like to pay tribute and thanks to all the officers that have been involved in the construction of this document. I'm glad to hear that we have cross-party support for this and the tenets that it sets out, but I'd also like to pay personal tribute to you, Councillor Charles, because I was reflecting when I was sitting here. It's been almost 17 years since I first met you, and I don't think in that time your commitment to community engagement, to addressing inequality has ever waned, and I think it's been one of those things that's at foremost at the centre of why you're in politics. And I can see that reflected in this document. It underlines this administration's, shall we say, intent, drive, ambition to try and level up communities, to address the inequalities, but also to engage with that community sector and bring others in and work with them to also tackle some of the difficult challenges that we face. The pandemic having exacerbated many of those, but nonetheless, to try and address those fundamental inequalities in society. And I know that's something that you've always been passionate about, and I pay tribute to you for your work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perrin. Comments? Councillor Edwards, and then I'll come to Councillor Edwards.
others speak.
There's
Sorry.
many. Councillor Edwards first.
I'll let others speak first and then I'll come in a little bit later.
Councillor Vince.
Thank you, Chair. And I've come to expect a lot of things from Cabinet, but I didn't expect a compliment from the Chair about my day job, so thank you for that. I, like my colleague, welcome a community resilience strategy and equally thank those officers who have taken on the task of creating it. I do think we need to be aware, as Councillor Edwards said, that COVID-19 is still with us and cases are currently rising. And I think we need to make sure we don't get too carried away on that one. I do share Councillor Edwards' concerns about consultation with the working group, and I appreciate the comments that you've made. But I really want to emphasise the importance of that working group. And I know, Chair, that you were involved with Councillor Harvey from the very creation of that group. It's a shame also that Councillor Harvey, as I say, who was heavily involved in that group, isn't here today. But I really hope that the new leader of Harlow Council, whoever that might be, will be as keen as his predecessor for cross-party working. That's something that Councillor Johnson, spoke a lot about the importance of was cross-party working, particularly in something like this, which is, ultimately, we all know this pandemic has affected everybody, whatever their political colours. And I also appreciate the strategic overarching document. This is a strategic overarching document, and some of the detail will come later. But I do look forward to seeing the nuts and bolts underneath it, and some really key strategies to move this town forward after what's been a pretty awful time for everybody. And I know our group have obviously suffered a very personal tragedy. But to finish on a more positive note, Councillor Saggers, it's the sort of political bias I like, as long as you recognise that Little Parliament has to be successful. But yeah, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Edwards.
Yes, just to reiterate my welcome to this document. The other thing I think is important is to recognise this is going to be a rolling document. I mean, you mentioned in the instruction that to be effectively looking in terms of 3-year planning, etc. I think going forward, I think as I was saying earlier, we're not out of the woods yet, and we're certainly not out of the economic woods yet in terms, and I suspect that's going to roll on for a few years. So, which is going to put a huge amount of strain, I think, on the town and on the resilience of the town. So, yes, we look forward to working in a cross-party way in terms of the strengthening of this document, and I look forward to sitting down with you and with the COVID recovery group to again just sort of going through this a little bit further, teasing out what your thoughts are, but equally adding to them hopefully in terms of and strengthening the document, because we want to do that in a constructive way. Thank you.
Councillor Carlton.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very big document, a very big strategy, which hopefully every council across the country is doing as we sort of try and move out of the COVID crisis. I very much appreciate it's going to be it's going to affect the entire community, and therefore quite right that we consult with the wider community. And in a small way, just to reassure Councillor Edwards, I have had a promise tonight from Councillor Charles that this topic will be available in large print. But also, I shall be watching or helping, hopefully, in how you reach out to the hard to reach groups and presenting this document in as many ways as possible.
Further comments? I see no further comments. I will just briefly wrap up. This is by no means a document that's going to address the matters that we know are very apparent in our post-COVID world overnight. It will take time to embed this strategy and deliver the individual pillar actions following consultation. But it is a clear roadmap that this administration wants to pursue for the council, and it's about refocusing our energy on what needs to be happening once we get to a point where we're looking like a recovery, and then looking towards the future of our community in particular. Wider economic challenges are at the forefront of our mind, and we have seen in previous documents some of the considerations around the built environment. But my determination through this strategy is to reach out to those diverse groups that make up what is great about this town, the charities, the volunteers who spearheaded over the last 18 months a heroic attempt to make sure those vulnerable people in our town are protected, and they should be at the forefront of our minds, and they know they are. But we will do more to support those individuals and empower them in the future so that we have a stronger community. We've gone through a number of challenges over the decades in this town, but what should be born out of this future is a determination as a community leader to reach out and enhance this community, because we know, and this town knows, that we are the greatest town in this country. I am proud of that. I'm born and bred in this town, as are others in this room, but we need to do more. We recognise that challenge, and this is the very start of that programme of activity. On that basis, and after summing up, recommendations A and B of this report on the Community Resilience Strategy, do I hear there is agreement? The report is agreed.